acquainted. So
It's just so it's.
we've just started your lessons here. You're here right on time.
That's what I use.
So, like I said, this is lesson 4, and it's a big lesson because right now you've been experimenting with auto mode, with lighting, with framing. Those are all building blocks. If you think of this as like anyone a fan of Marvel, yeah. Think of this as like what? Think of this as like the big team up event. We're combining all of those things that you've learned into this main lesson. Now I won't be addressing them directly, but you will be using them in combining what you will learn today. So, does anyone want to recap? I'm sorry, your name again? Ema. Does anyone want to recap what we've learned for Ema?
In lesson 3, we learned about lighting.
Okay. What particular about lighting?
It's different types of lighting, like sunlight, moonlight, room lighting, other lights.
Okay. Question for you: how do I make my light softer? I'll come back to you. How do I make my light softer?
We can use the diffuser that you bought.
Correct. What kind of devices can make artificial light? Yeah. Maybe that might jog your memory?
Does the light that you brought the last time count as well?
That does count. It's a different type of light, but yes, it does count. So we learned about lighting and photography. What about lesson 2? And remember, I know it's a little bit back. No?
Framing and composition.
Yes, framing. What in particular? What kind of techniques?
The rule of thirds.
Good. What else? Isabella?
I'm trying to remember.
Mia?
I only remember the rule of thirds.
Okay. You have leading lines. You have the windowing. You have color temperature. That was with lighting. That's lesson 3. What else? You had balancing your frame, and using the rule of thirds. So, with that little pop quiz, I know it's not graded. Nothing is graded, but I should be frankly honest with you. Just like this, lesson 4 is a big team up, Avengers team up. You guys will have a big Avengers team up in the end. And I haven't disclosed this yet, so I'm going to tell you now. At the end of this course, your work is going to be hosted in a photography art exhibit that we're going to be holding here at school at the end of the course. I know everyone just got nervous, like, oh. So,
When is the end of the course?
end of the course is in 12 weeks, give or take, depending on how many people show up per week. Sometimes we might repeat lessons, so for the other people here, depending, we're about half down. No, maybe about 65% down. So yes, that's why we're starting to do the review of your guys' photos to make sure that you are applying these in your free time. So, lighting photography, Ket and G. Okay. Tell me how you applied lighting in these scenarios.
Well, in picture 1, I used the room lighting to take a picture of Mr. P doing his logo for his wedding.
Okay.
At home, I took a picture of the sunlight, like the sunset.
Okay.
I know it's a little bit dimmer at the bottom, so I just used sunlight for that.
Okay.
I did the same thing with my sister, but it kind of got a little bit dimmer.
Yes. So as we tell here, it is a little bit dimmer. The light source that you did use wasn't as strong, but we got some of that.
Mr. P.
What we can tell here is from the shadows here, whatever light source this was coming from was diffused. Sometimes these can act as diffusers, these headlights over here, because the plastic, depending on how thick it is. I'm just checking to make sure this is recording. Yes, it is. Depending on how thick the plastic is, it kind of acts as a diffuser. So maybe it was something similar to that. It's kind of have like that frosted look. Over here, you expose for the sunset, which is awesome. And you kind of have the silhouette kind of feel. And if we did our rule of thirds right here. We're going to jump back another lesson. You frame the rule of thirds and you frame the bottom one around the, I would call it event horizon. That's not what it's called. It's just the landscape here. But event horizon sounds cooler. So I liked how you did that. Explain to me this one. It's okay. You can take a second.
I use the room light and a little bit of lighting in my camera to bring it out.
Okay.
Now it's not a little bit. It's not a little bit different. Yeah, it's more of that.
Yes, you expose for more of the light. And because that light source here, not only does it bounce down, but as it bounces to the ground, it bounces around, so it kind of gets caught. So you kind of get a little more illuminated here compared to something like over here, which it might just be one direction. Isabella? Oh, there it is.
Aw, cute cat.
It looks just like my cat, except yours has blue eyes, and now I'm jealous.
What's your cat's name?
My cat's name is called Bella.
What about yours?
Her name's Thea.
Thea?
Those are
Very
cute
close.
names.
I have a rule with pets. I'm gonna go to the sidetrack. I have a rule with pets. The name has to be with at least 1 or 2 syllables, because if you try to say something like Margarita or something like that, it's like, I know that's the first thing that pops in my mind. It's really hard to say it, like trying to get them like if they're running away from a car. So I like 1 or 2 syllables, like Peanut or Daisy. You know, those are 2.
That reminds me of dog. Speaking of which, I'm actually gonna get a dog for myself too.
That's good.
But I'm gonna name him Shadow.
Shadow, that's cool. So, I really love this photo. How did you use lighting?
I used the window lighting in the back, so I opened the curtains and then I got a close-up shot on them.
Nice. I love how you describe your planning. That's good. Another thing that you did well is, if we look right here, we can see the actual window source right here. The reason why I want to point this out, and it's not necessarily in photography, more cinematography, but you can transfer it over. What do you call it? When you see, this is called eye light. When you see this, it usually brings in almost like some sort of life into your character, to whatever you're taking, if they have eyes. That's why you see in like in movies when a character dies, you see the little light, especially in Pixar, it goes doop, and it's gone. So adding a little eye light is like a nice little touch. And I like your framing as well. Your framing of your portrait. Your rule of thirds. You have the cat in the center. And the reason why this works as the center instead of being the top third right here is because if you did, you were balancing the ground element and the sky element with the cat as well. So good job. Next photo. Oh, wait. My only, not critique, but for next time, is how you open up the window. Windows have, the curtains have multiple fabrics that you can move. Try to pick one that's like semi-thin or slightly thicker, but still transparent. The reason why, remember how we're talking about diffusion? Similar material. It would diffuse it, and so it would just be a little bit softer, but overall, good job. Let's talk about the next image.
The other 2, I just was messing with the manual, how you taught us, and just moving the lighting, and that's what came out.
Okay, so you went into manual mode. Nice. I really like. Where was this taken? Was this taken in a greenhouse or where was this?
Oh, that was taken in my hallway.
In your hallway. Okay. Where was the light source coming from? I assume it's above.
Yes.
Let me guess. A skylight. So different. This is like a regular light. Skylights are actual like window or above. Okay. And how far away was that skylight compared to where the flower is?
Like not too far. It was like right there, and then the flowers right here.
Okay. So the reason why the lighting looked so soft, does anyone want to guess? I just talked about it like 10 minutes ago. It's like that one game, Plinko or whatever, it's like doing. It's a hit right there. Everyone ever played with a bouncy ball before? What I'm trying to say is that because of the skylight, because it's square and how it's coming in, the light is bouncing off from the side and getting diffused as it comes in, which is why you have such natural transitions between your highlights and your shadows here. Other things, I loved how you use your, you tighten your focal length. I think it's a little bit hard to tell on the, did you tighten your focal length?
Very little.
Very little, yes. And the reason why I say that, which I know, is because on your kit lens, there's something called variable aperture. We'll talk about aperture today. At the widest length, it's actually the lowest. I think like a 3.5, something like that. Well, at the tightest, it's like a 5.6. Looking at the blurriness here, this is more consistent with an f3.5. So it's kind of semi on the wide side. So, good job here. And what about this?
I also just did the same thing. I was just
Same
messing
thing?
with the manual.
Okay. In particular, what settings did you mess with in manual for the shot?
It was like the more white, like light.
Okay, so you were messing with the color temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, manual and color temperature are two different things. But that's good. That's also a good thing you've done in all three. Because sometimes, like rooms like this, you'll have a tungsten light, and so it'll be warmer or cooler depending where you're at. So good job with compensating for the light. My only critique here is there just seems to be a lack of intention, I guess right here, since it's mostly here and here. So maybe just next time, if you see this void here?
Yeah.
Something's supposed to be there, at least to capture our attention. But that's okay. You did a good job. And finally, Mia.
I still wasn't able to upload the photos.
Okay, that's fine. Let's take a look on your camera.
This one?
Hmm.
This way?
Oh boy, yeah, that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was.
My dad usually used this.
So as we load this up, Iman, have you had any experience with photography or
Kind of.
kind of?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's take a look here.
Not that much though.
Alrighty, so the first one we have is what kind of flower is this? Do you know?
I have no idea.
No. Okay.
Let me
We'll
see
see
real
some
quick.
anywhere. Maybe Kenjit knows. So tell me what in this photo did
Looks like roses.
how did you use the fundamentals of lighting?
Well, the sunlight was directly hitting the flower, and I like how it made the color pop more, and then the greenery around it is just, I don't know how to explain it.
Okay.
But the light lied directly on the flower.
Kenjit, let's wait till we finish up with the first image.
Sorry.
That's fine. Take a look.
Oh, that's a good picture.
Isabel, have you seen it?
It's pretty.
And then I'm just going to show it to the camera. Hi. Okay.
These are pretty flowers.
So, what I've seen that you've done here, which I really like, is you have subconsciously used, I wouldn't say a full 3-point lighting system, but a definitely 2-point. And the reason why I say that is where the angle of the sun's coming down, so it's coming down this way here. It's harshest in the back right here, but then it has a soft rollout, probably just where it's located. Maybe it was like semi-cloudy, semi-sunny that day. So, there's a little bit of a harsh light on the side here. What kind of lighting did we talk about?
Sunlight.
That is the type of light, but the position of the light. Remember when we were talking about portraits? You had your key. You had your fill. What made me stand? If I were the subject, what would you need to put in order to make me stand out from the background?
Light from behind, but I forgot what it was called.
You're super close. You literally said part of it. It's called backlight. Or hair light, or rim light, depending on the position. So I like that. Let's see. I'm not sure which photo's next.
You
Let me
go ahead
let
and-
me show you.
I took quite a few actually.
Okay,
so-
I'll let you choose.
Okay.
So, while she's doing that, I did bring my camera. This is similar to yours, except there is one big difference. This one has a full frame sensor. If one of you were to take off your camera, Kenji, I don't know if you'll see in yours because yours is a mirrored one. But if you were to take, what do you call it? I guess if you want to take off the lens so you can see the sensor. Okay, that's your next one. If you were to take off the lens here, you would see that your sensor is a little bit smaller. We will briefly touch upon the sensor size, but a good thing to know, your sensor size actually crops in a little. And because of that, your focal length, you know how it says like a 35 whatever, it isn't a true 35. That would be, where did I put this? That would be like a 37, 38 mil. And so it's something to keep in mind. It doesn't have a super big impact, at least right now at your learning stage. So let's get back to reviewing the photos. So we have this one here. It's of a daisy or dandelion, whatever kind of. Take a look.
It looks more like a tulip.
Actually, do you mind if I hold up your camera for a second? I want to show them the mirrored part. So, back to what I was talking about before we move on. On the right is what we used to use. On the left is where technology is currently at. What do you see that's different near the sensor plane?
It's bigger.
It's bigger. Good observation. What else? It might be a little bit hard to see, but this one here has a mirror in it. You see that? There's no mirror here. This is mirrorless. This is DSLR. So there is a digital sensor in here, but there is a single lens reflector. Thank you, Kenji. So we got rid of the mirror, and now the sensor sends an output to our viewfinder, which is right here. So back to the dandelion or whatever flower it was called.
Tulip.
I don't know if it was a tulip. There we go. So we have it here. Tell me what you used in this one.
I have the light behind.
Okay, so you're using the hair light. The time of day is definitely different. What time of day
It's
is
a
that?
different day. I don't remember.
So, from what it looks like, it definitely is a noonday, but it definitely isn't golden hour. So what I would say is that this was probably shot right before, a couple hours before golden hour. So, as you can already tell, the shadows, the transition between highlights and shadows is already softening. That's one advantage of shooting at golden hour. I like how we didn't talk about this. This is called the slight tilt. That's called a Dutch angle. That's from cinematography, but you can apply it over here as well. The story element of Dutch angles is when the narrative is being overturned. You know, something's about to overturn and almost flip the stakes. I like how you've done the Dutch angle here because it's almost like there's something with this flower. You know, there's a little bit of mystery to it. Is there any other pictures you want to show us before we move on?
No, I think that's
Okay, well, good job.
Those are nice flowers you got.
Thank you.
Alright. So, let's get back to our lesson. So, why understanding camera settings matter. So, we're going to mainly be talking about manual mode and the other similar modes called priority modes. So the power of manual mode. While automatic modes make photography easy, manual mode gives full control over how an image looks. Manual settings allow photographers to adapt to different lighting conditions and creative goals. We already saw a little bit when Isabel was talking about how she was manipulating the color balance. Think of manual mode as like that, but on steroids for every single setting. Mastering settings help avoid overexposure, underexposure, or blurry images. So the exposure triangle. The exposure triangle is a fundamental way to balance an image. It's a visual way to understand how the following attributes affect not just your image, but each other. Now, there's going to be a lot of redundancy in the slides, and it's just because while I can tell you the aspects that it affects, we're also going to want to see it visually in case you're a visual learner. I know for me, I'm a visual learner. So, you have your aperture. That's your f-stop. What is the aperture? It controls the depth of field in the image. We're going to talk about that soon. You have your shutter speed. It controls the motion blur of an image. And then you have your ISO. I never knew this before teaching this class. International Organization of Standardization, but you can just call it ISO. That it controls the image brightness and noise of your sensor. So, here is a video explaining about the exposure triangle.
ISO, shutter speed, and aperture are related. Whether you're a photographer or filmmaker, understanding the exposure triangle will help ensure you're able to capture better images. Your shutter speed controls your shutter, which is the gate that lifts up to control the amount of light that hits the sensor or film plane. The slower your shutter, the more motion blur. The faster your shutter, the more crisp your image. So if you want to freeze action, go with a faster shutter speed. Your aperture controls your depth of field. To get more in focus, stop down your iris blades to the bigger number. To get less in focus and a shallower depth of field, open up your iris blades to that faster, smaller number. Your ISO is your film speed or the sensitivity of your film or sensor to light. The higher your ISO, the more you can expose in low light, the noisier your image will be. As recommended, keep your ISO as low as possible for the cleaner image. And remember, next time you're trying to set exposure,
So, I know it's a little bit quick, but everyone get what he was talking about? Maybe? Any questions? Questions? We're going to talk about more, but just in case. Just to talk back to lesson 3 about lighting. What's this here? It's illuminating the majority of himself.
Colored lighting?
Huh?
Colored lighting?
No, it's actually at a neutral color right now. Starts with the letter K. Illuminates most of your subject. You know this. I know you guys know this. It's called key lighting. This is your key light. If this is your key light, what is this in the back here? Look how it's affecting the back. Starts with an R. Illuminates the back. Mia answered it. Is anyone paying attention? This was called your rim light. Don't worry. The more we have activities, the more I'll help you guys to remember this stuff. Escape here. Not yet. So, let me make sure that we're talking about that. So let's first talk about aperture and how it affects the depth of field. So what is aperture? Aperture is the opening in the lens that controls how much light enters the camera. It's measured in f-stops. So for example, this lens is an f2. You also have ones that are faster of it, like f1.4, f1.8. And then you have ones that are bigger than it, f4 and f16. So wide aperture, which means a smaller number, an example, f2 or f1.8, it lets more light in. It creates a shallow depth of field. That's what we also call blurry background. Then a narrow aperture is a large f number, an example, f16. It lets in less light, increases the depth of field, which means a sharper background. So actually, if you want to look right here, the whole way we get that, and the video is going to talk about it, think of your aperture as almost like a human eye. When it needs to let more light in, we make our eye bigger. So take a look at this. See those blades?
Yeah, we do it every day.
It opens like that. Do it one more time for the ladies in the back.
We still have hiccups.
And it opens like that. Now your camera does something similar. The only difference is that it does it, and you might hear a little. It's a horrible sound effect. It's like tick, 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 tick. That's because it's clipped. This is a declicked lens. A declicked lens, used more in cinematography, but you can still use it for photography. Kendrick, you want to see it? This is all closed down. I'm gonna let you just see it, and then I'm gonna open it like that. So those blades are responsible for shaping the blurriness in your background, and they'll also shape something called bokeh, which we'll talk about soon. But now this is from one of my favorite series from YouTube. I highly recommend you go to the channel called Studio Binder. They offer a lot of great info.
A camera lens functions just like the human eye. The pupil is responsible for how much light is let in. To allow more light to pass through, the pupil opens up or expands. And to allow less light, the pupil closes or shrinks. Aperture works the same way. Aperture is the opening through which light travels and eventually hits the camera's sensor. It is the size of the aperture's opening that not only affects the brightness of the image, but it directly affects the area of a shot that is in
Remember
focus.
that zone we were talking about in
This is
lesson
known as
2, I think?
depth of field.
That's another way to visualize it.
The smaller the aperture, the greater the depth of field. Conversely, a large aperture gives us a shallow area of focus. The size of a camera's aperture is expressed in f numbers or f stops, based on how open or closed the aperture may be. Oh shit.
Oops.
Just a bit of biology.
You did not hear that last part.
Oh, we did.
So, setting an aperture. So let's talk about how aperture affects the following scenarios. Portrait photography. So, portrait photography, a lot of times you're going to use a wide aperture, f1.8 to f4, for a blurry background to isolate the subject. Isolation will vary depending on how wide your aperture is. So f1.8, like we said, very blurry. What that means is that there's not going to be really any detail in the background. It'll be very blurry. So think of like Isabel's photo with her cat or the flowers. Our focus was on the flower. There's nothing really else. We did see some light, and that's called bokeh, which we'll talk about right now, after this. Semi-blurry, which is at f4. Sometimes objects will be visible in the background, and you can use that. Let's say if you want to have something in the background you want to point out, but you don't want it to be too visible. And then finally, a wider aperture also creates bokeh balls. Technically it's just called bokeh, but I just call it bokeh balls. And the reason why is that with bokeh, in the background, it actually is a result of it's a result of refracting light rays and out of focus elements. So a really good, and you can do this at home or during your activity, I want you to find a tree or some kind of leaves and make sure that it's out of focus in the background. And if you see like little colors coming up, that's bokeh. And the reason why that works is because a lot of the times trees, their leaves will refract light. That's how they gain their source. Everyone remember photosynthesis? Well, now you know how to use it. And so that's just one way that you can make your images a little bit more cinematic. So let's take a look at these images over here. The question is, how do you think a wide and narrow aperture adds to or potentially takes away from an image's stylistic or subtle messaging? So let's take a look at this image right here. This is definitely shot at probably at I want to say f1.8, more like an f2.8. What does the blurry background here add to the messaging about? Isabel? We'll come back to Isabel. You want to give it a stat? I'll give you a hint. It isolates the subject. But what else does it do? It enhances something about the subject. By isolating with the blur in the back, it brings more detail to the unkempt hair, the clothes, etc. That's how isolating your subject using the blur can do. What about this one here? Everyone know where this is at?
Paris.
Paris. How do you know?
Because of the Eiffel Tower.
The Eiffel Tower, yes. So this one is more like, I want to say F3 or 4. And they're really far away, which is why it's still very blurry in the background. Honestly, I actually feel like the blur takes away from this. Because you're out of focus, and yes, that element's still there, but it's the Eiffel Tower. Don't you want to see the beauty of the Eiffel Tower? You know? I feel like it takes away from that because they use a high aperture. What about this one here? I don't think we've talked about it. I think we'll talk about it soon. Look how all this is in focus here.
Yeah, there's no blur.
There's no blur. It brings attention to every single part of the image. This is what in cinematography, but you can transfer it to photography, is called deep focus. This one is just, like the thing said, it's a narrow aperture. Remember how we're opening and closing the lens? The hole was really small. That means everything in the scene's gonna be sharp. This is about an f/16, f/22. f/22 is the max here. What does having everything in focus do to the image? How does it help with the message? Kenji? Give Kenji a second to think. Mia?
I mean, it doesn't put the focus on one thing.
True. What does it also focus on?
No.
The mountain, the cactus, the trees here. While it's a beautiful image, having everything in focus, especially at the angle of shot, almost gives like this, it gives majestic, but also lonely in the sense of, look how small I am compared to the rest of the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Finally, we have this one. So this one's also at a deep focus. Can you see? How does the deep focus add to here? What does it enhance? What do you think? How does the deep focus, that's f/22, where everything's sharp, how does that add to the image, the messaging? Anyone else want to guess? Isabella?
I would say it kind of like sort of brings it to life. Like,
Yes, it brings it to life. Think about our framing techniques. With everything in focus, what else does it enhance? What framing technique in particular? We just talked about it like 10 minutes ago. Yes, you're right actually. Because if I were to draw my rule of thirds right here, we're actually, the bottom line is actually hitting around right here. So yes, it does enhance that. Even if it was blurry, it wouldn't necessarily take away from it, but by the fact that it is a deep focus, it does kind of add to it. Mia? There's something here.
The trees, they're pointing
Yes.
direction to.
In art, this would technically be called a vanishing point because we have our leading lines right here. And then you also have these, while they point up and down, and there isn't a strong connection, you do see the lines coming here, like that. So, the deep focus helps enhance the leading lines aspect. Does that make sense? Any questions? No? So, landscape photography. So we talked about it, yes, deep focus, brings attention to everything. You can use deep focus in your storytelling by adding elements that simply infer more about the story. Staging or stagnating certain subjects or elements to create additional depth. I did this once with our graduates last graduation. They're all standing, they're doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and they actually just fell in this way where they just, one was right here, one was in the front, and one was slightly in the back. And so they were doing the Pledge of Allegiance, but in the photo, they're staggered, but there's a subtle leading line pointing to the person in the front. And because they're staggered, it also creates depth as well. And I wouldn't say it was deep focus. It would say it was more at like a f4 maybe, at the most f8. And then finally, enhancing other elements, leading lines and windowing. We don't see any windowing here, but we do have the leading lines here. And also, actually, it's a good comparison. So we know that the deep focus enhances here, but look how the blurry focus takes away here. What did you not see off the bat? Leading lines right here to the subject. The tower wouldn't count because it's too far away, but you do have balancing here. Any question before I move on? No? So, mini activity. I want you to turn on your camera, and you'll be putting the mode into aperture priority. That has the letter A on it. I can give you a camera. So just some basics about the camera. Your on and off switch right here. You have to turn this in order to get this into its shooting range. I'll have to take off the res cam. What do you call it? And then let's move it to aperture priority. These are your modes here. Right now you're manual. Which one do you think is aperture priority? Right next to it, the A right there. So I'll let you turn that.
Which one's mine?
What is it?
I have had these other ones though.
So could see maybe it's this one here. Autofocus depth. No, that's not that. Huh. Weird. Okay, that's fine. If you want, you can use another camera
But it's
here.
supposed to.
Let me take a look at it right now.
I'm not sure. I think it's
This is my first time using the camera.
Yeah, that's fine.
I've had a different camera.
Mhm.
It was like a cheap camera.
Okay.
This is not the first time I took a camera either.
It's alright.
One time I went to San Francisco and then took the picture of it.
I'm sorry. What was the question, you asked?
It's supposed to be on.
Yes. So, aperture priority mode. So, remember how you guys were shooting in auto mode and it determined all the settings for you? Think of this, but now it's a little bit more, you get to decide what aperture you want while it does the rest for the shutter speed and the ISO. So, are you able to get into aperture priority?
Is it AV? 'Cause I'm not too sure.
It's gonna be, actually, yes, it is AV.
Okay.
Oh, it's 80.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That one was, where is it? It is right there.
One says 8.
Does yours have the AV on it?
Yes.
Sorry, A and AV. I guess it determines which camera brand you're with. For me, I have, if you want to look at my Panasonic right here, I have A. And so, see, I have the letter A here. So when I wrote the lesson, I just assumed it was me A, not AV. Okay, so how do we control our aperture on your camera? So I want you to pick a subject.
We can meet about half of them.
It could either be a tree, it could be me, it could be the person across from you.
Part is a lot of the responsibility.
It could be anything. Preferably something that has some distance to it.
Is she doing
So,
hospital
no
or
mug
is she
shots,
doing
okay?
independent
No
study?
against the wall.
Okay.
5.
So that's my big concern.
4.
Is like you mentioned.
Mine just
Is
I'll do
she's
it.
gonna have a large.
Just turn it. And sometimes it might fall asleep.
That would be.
Oh, that's
right.
fine. So the live viewfinder is on, so if you put your eye up to it, it's going to turn off this LCD. You'll be able to see through here. So like Zoe last time took a picture of one of the flowers here. Isabel, maybe you could take a picture of your kombucha. I wouldn't do it like that because that's kind of mug shot. So what you could do is just move this out of the way, and now you have some depth. Now you're dabbling in product photography. So
that's a positive, but a lot of it is
for your guys' camera,
you know, 'cause
In order
it
to
is
control the
intense.
aperture, you're gonna have to move this little wheel in the
I
front
don't
here.
know, have you had the chance? to
Actually,
discuss
correction,
with
that's on mine.
inflation
Your guys is,
possible
you have
reentry
this
on,
one. They just moved it
you know,
over here.
whether it be, I don't know,
Yours
what
should be
software
what it's like a dial or something in the front. It can either be like this, or it could be a dedicated wheel in the front.
There's a resource class.
Yes.
She was.
So, actually, do you mind if I borrow your camera? So, look here on Kenton Jeet's camera. When you move the wheel, it controls the aperture right here. See how we're getting lower? Or now we're at 5.6, and I can bring it down to 8 like that. You're only controlling that aspect. The camera's determining the rest of it for you. So pick whatever aperture you want. It can be a low one, like the max for you is like 3.5, or it can be max. Maybe you want depth focus, deep focus. So when you're doing that, it is actually how manual lenses used to do it. It's the same thing here. I'm manually opening up my lens like this. So let's say, did you take a picture of your kombucha yet?
And
Let me see.
just, was Miss Pereira at the IEP yesterday?
Awesome. But we tried getting it a little bit
Okay.
closer.
So,
So I want you to come
and
look at
I
my
don't wanna
side
speak for you, Mom, but
So
if
first-
I'm just going off of our conversation.
First, I have, I'm gonna open up my aperture like this. For you, that would be,
I would recommend maybe
and if you wanna come take a look, you can as well.
psychologist at Glacier, and maybe coming
So,
up with the behavior
I've
support
opened it up
plan
to F2,
and all these
and then now I'm gonna bring it into focus here.
possibly can be addressed in a behavior support plan, so if something starts to go
Okay.
awry,
Now it's right to me on 1/3 overexposed. I'm gonna slightly overexpose here. And you see how I've kind of put it at its eye level?
Where Ayla's not sure how to handle it, she can, she can ask, can I go speak with Miss Pereira, can I go speak with the school counselor?
You see, we used the blurriness in the background, we brought it into focus, and then we put it on the same focal length. If you put it like this, you're basically minimizing your subject. If you put it like this, now I am
But at the same time, I do know
maximizing my subject because I'm putting it at a higher angle.
amount of time that she would have with support.
This might be slightly overexposed.
And I think ultimately that's what the goal is. You want her to be able to function, especially now. What better time?
This
to
slightly
start
overexposed,
solving
but look how that puts it up.
by the time
It's
she
empowering
graduates,
our
we already
subject.
have a plan involved.
So try doing that again on yours with the kombucha.
You
You guys can pick something here. Let me know when you've got a picture. The Chromebook, no. Having you help? Or?
And then that's actually something that's happened in the IEP. And then, Mom, you can say, these are things that have worked in the past, these are things that haven't worked in the past. And as
That's the menu button.
Glacier, you guys can kind of like,
There you go.
hey, if things start to go.
Okay, so you've taken like a deep focus one here.
Yeah, it's like
At 14, good job. Now I want you to take a wide aperture. Okay. So I want you to take a picture of a Red Bull can here. Let's go Red Bull. So first thing you might want to do is, let's say you want to do a vertical one. What would you do? So you do it like that. Maybe you might want to tighten your focal length so you get a tighter frame. So remember how we move this? It's tighter here. So maybe you want to tighten your frame. Lose it?
And since you just had her
Good job. How about try it? In order to learn aperture, like the best way and the fastest way, try to focus on the widest aperture. So that's like a 3.5. And then combine that with a tight focal length. So the reason why that's the fastest way is because not only, so yeah, I would put your lens at the tightest it can be. Yes. And now you have your aperture at the widest. Let's take a look. See, when you create So So this one here, that's a good one. Yes. Now try it, but with a wide aperture. Remember what the wide aperture means? That means that your aperture will be really wide. Open. That's more like it. So that would be press menu. Now I want you to adjust your aperture using that. So you see, try to bring it down to the lowest number. Yes, so it stops at 7.1. 6.3. Okay, so now you can try. So when we take a look at Ken Jeets here.
No, mine's an iPhone.
Everything good?
Why isn't my background blurry?
So here's a couple of reasons why. The kit lens here, when it's at the tightest, it has actually the narrowest aperture, 7.1. So it's called variable aperture, and in order to keep costs down, it's cheaper to have different lens elements and impact the blurriness of the image compared to a lens like mine, which has a consistent aperture. Okay, so actually if you want a more blurry one, put yours to the widest, which is 18, and then bring down the aperture to the lowest it can be. So the reason why I said on certain ones, a tight focal length can help bring in the blurriness, depending if you have a consistent aperture. Like this one here, we're tight here with Kenji's camera. Now, if the aperture was blurry, you see all this blurriness here. It'll isolate the subject. Here you go, Kenji. That's good. Now try the what do you call it? A wide focal length, so the 18. So wide as you can go, and now bring down your aperture to the lowest number.
Yeah.
So you see you're at a 6.3. Let's bring that down. Yeah, so the max is 4.5. Now get really close to, actually I'll bring this up right here. And now, there you go, that's better. How about you try Kenji? How are you ladies doing over here? Let me see what's going on.
It's a little bit blurry. Oh yeah.
Let me see here. So you are at an 18. Yes, so you lowered it down, keep on lowering it down to 4.5. Now, in order to get a blurriness in your image, there's two things you gotta do. Remember the focal length? So you brought down the focus distance from like here to here. But because you moved it away here, you're still kind of putting it into the deep focus kind of category. Does that make sense? So, let's say I bring this here. Now try focusing on one of those, preferably maybe like this one here. Get really close as you can get. Now try to level out your camera so we can see more of the background. Other way. So bring it down, like that. And now get a little closer. It might not focus because it's too close. It depends. Here, try clicking on it. Okay, back up a little more. I'll try it again. Okay. So that was good. Let's try it again. How are you doing over here?
Confused.
Confused? Okay, what's confusing?
I don't even know.
I'll let you.
F18.
F18. Let's bring down that f stop. It's the lowest.
Because my nose in here.
Oh, I see. What you want to do? Press.
Or what you use to file your income taxes, but your payroll taxes are the taxes you pay for
There you go. So you accidentally press this and then move to this level
That
up
makes
here.
sense.
So now try it.
Oh,
Kenji, how you doing over there?
On your paycheck,
Good.
on the left-hand side where it says da-da-da-da.
So I'm gonna come around with my camera. I'm gonna let you guys kind of use it so that. And I know it's a little bit hard to try to get the shallow depth of field just because the lens and that aperture. So let's see. Who do you want to take a picture of, or what do you want to take a picture
Join
of?
that meeting, that way if you wanna compare COHS to the other alternatives
Okay,
or
so you
what
hold the camera like this.
I'm more than happy to be there.
So make sure you have a good grip on the top here.
Say, okay, well, if she
Okay, now
does
this is a manual lens.
that's how
So
it
you
is.
want to move this down.
Because we do have some of those services as well.
You want to start
I'm
twisting
Oh,
that.
you're not in the way.
I
There,
really
I'm
don't.
more than happy. That way if we have questions.
Because you were in the way, you could still.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Now he's kind of more focused.
Okay, so your stars.
Okay.
there.
Stars and Phoenix. Did you
There we
ever
go.
go to private session?
Press.
Yeah, like Wells Fargo.
There. So he's slightly out of
So
focus,
you have
which is fine.
pay social security.
So I want you to take a look at how I'm going to do it right here.
Okay.
Get a picture of him.
Because
Here's
you
my
work for the
thing.
state or federal or whatever.
So one thing I can do to get blurrier, blurrier background, I'm going to move it all the way closer to here.
I have always said.
I'm going to pull my focus here. And now I check my exposure. We're fine. We're at F2.
You don't receive it. Well, now, based on
The only thing I need to do here is probably compensate with white balance.
and retention.
You want to try?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit heavier than the one that you were using. Mia, how are we doing back there? Good? You understand? Awesome.
Try taking pictures.
So how about you try, it's either Kenji or, so it is a manual.
We're gonna pay taxes like your paycheck.
So it's not a zoom, it's a prime lens, which means it's fixed. So that part's just going to bring it into focus.
You pay your house payment, they charge you taxes, which you've already paid the taxes on your income.
So keep on moving the ring.
Gas station. You pay
I
gas.
know, first time when you're using a manual lens, if you're not exactly sure what's happening, it does get a little bit confusing.
There's no other state in the union that charges as much as we do for ads. Half them off.
There you go.
So I
So
mean,
let's take a
when you
look
stop
right
and
here.
actually look at it, it's like, we are talking about
It's a little bit blurry.
It's a little bit blurry, but the background's at least compressed.
Yeah.
Isabel, would you like to take a try?
I'm hoping you guys will promise it. My biggest fear is
Very, very much heavier than.
Let's see one take a picture of our kombucha.
first strategy.
What flavor is kombucha?
This one's pink baby apple top, but there's a lot of different flavors.
Okay. So because it's a manual lens, we're going to want to
No, I'm just,
use the focus
This?
ring, yes, in order to bring it into focus.
you know, and our
We're going to bring in the focus ring very stiff.
governor.
There you go.
Not mine.
Oh, that's fine. Now we're going
This
to
is my
press.
He's fucking
Yeah, I'm an Indian. There's Sikh.
Oh, that's so much better.
Oh.
Yeah, you want to try? It's okay. Here, guys. Well, I brought it.
Are you Indian too?
So well, now let's try it.
I
Let's
was
try
like, that's
the.
hard.
Let's try this one right here. See that there?
There's Indian too.
So here's how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna try to bring it as much
Well,
close
you
as
know,
I
my parents
can.
sometimes tell me that
There's a
this-
minimum
It'll be
focus
raised by
distance
close
on here though.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. One of my friends, he got his eyes. Well, we're like playing basketball, so he got like the whole scratch.
There we go. So the minimum focus distance is right here. Okay, I want you to give it a try.
clear his answers.
So how you hold it. Everyone, this is how you hold a full frame camera, which is heavier. 4 index
I would
here, 4 index. I'm gonna grab it here. I'm gonna dig into the grip.
Are
You see my-
seeing what we did
My
to
thumb here,
Yeah.
the most
like that.
beautiful state in the union?
To me, this feels like nothing because I've held it around for a while. But when I first got it, without the cage or anything, so let's try to. I'll move the focus for you.
One of my friends just goes, they go home.
Move that flower pot away. So she
Let's try here because the minimum focus is enough. Just keep it here. So we get something in focus. There we go.
I am, I'm all for it.
Right there. We're gonna move it now. Precision. There you go. It's in burst mode, so it'll take multiple photos. See, that's how it came out. We see a little bit of the blurriness in the back.
Mhm.
So does everyone understand now aperture?
Yes.
Okay. Funny enough, I said we extended our lesson time in order to get extra time for the activity, but somehow I always manage to overdo myself. So, shutter speed and how it affects motion in an image. So what is shutter speed? Shutter speed determines how long the camera sensor is exposed to light, measured in fractions of a second. So that's 1 over 1,000, 1 over 250, and 1 over 30 seconds. Fast shutter speeds is like 1 over 1,000 or faster. It freezes moving subjects. Slow shutter speeds, like 1/30th of a second, will create motion blur. And a way to understand this is by watching this video here.
What is shutter speed? Well, it may seem like the answer is obvious. There's more to shutter speed than meets the eye. Let's take a closer look. Shutter speed is one of the 3 pillars of photography, the other 2 being ISO and aperture. Also known as exposure time, shutter speed is defined as the length of time the image sensor in a camera is exposed to incoming light. Before we go more in depth, however, let's take a look at the different parts of the camera that contribute to taking a photo. In a standard DSLR, when you press the shutter button, a mirror flips up, allowing light to pass into the camera instead of the viewfinder. Once the mirror is flipped upwards, a small door will move from top to bottom, exposing the sensor beneath. After that, another door will fall down, covering up the entire sensor. After the second door closes, your mirror will fall back into place. The doors will then reset to their original positions underneath. The longer the shutter is kept open, the more light will enter the camera. In auto mode, cameras will meter the scene and determine an adequate shutter speed to keep the picture from becoming either over or underexposed. You can manually change the shutter speed by either putting the camera in shutter priority mode, which will let you change shutter speed, letting the camera calculate ISO and aperture, or full manual mode, which gives you full control over all your camera settings. Shutter speeds are measured in fractions of a second, when under 1 second. For example, 1 over 4 displayed on the camera means the shutter speed is 1/4 a second, whereas 1 over 250 means the shutter speed is 1/250th of a second. Most cameras can handle shutter speeds as fast as 1/4000th of a second, or sometimes even as high as 1/8000th of a second, and shutter speeds as long as 30 seconds. Longer shutter speeds can be achieved using a function known as bulb mode, where the shutter speed is determined by the length of time the shutter button is activated, either manually or through a remote trigger. It's good to know what effects different shutter speeds have, as it can affect the type of picture produced. Short shutter speeds, often quicker than 1/1000th of a second, are fast enough to capture the fast movement of wildlife and sports, and freeze water droplets and small particles. For everyday photography, shutter speeds around 1/100th of a second are fast enough to keep subjects from blurring. If you're shooting handheld, longer shutter speeds may also cause your shaky hands to blur the photo. Newer lenses from most manufacturers have attempted to solve this problem by introducing vibration reduction technology into lenses to correct for minor shakes. Night photography will often utilize longer shutter speeds to capture as much light as possible. Shutter speeds as long as 20 or 30 seconds may even be used to take pictures of the Milky Way. Knowing the principles of shutter speed will allow you to make better decisions about how you want your picture to look, whether you're freezing the action, creating a time warp effect, letting in little light, or as much as you can. Though it's a very basic concept of photography, it is no less important than making a fantastic photo.
Actually, that's an understatement. Personally, in my experience, shutter speed has been the hardest thing to understand, because in order to actually apply it, you need to have a moving object. So instead of all of you guys using your camera, you guys are going to stand near me, and one of you guys is going to be my subject, and we're going to show you the difference between the 1/30th and the 1/1000th. But everyone understands, the smaller the number, the longer the exposure, the bigger, the quicker. Everyone understands that? Alrighty.
Yeah, I'm in.
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Anyone want to be wonder? You want? Yeah. Okay. So Kenji, I want you to stand right here. Everyone can come this way towards me. Try to get as close as you can if you can. So for my shutter speed, I always like 125 for portraits. And so that's fast enough for it to capture things without it like darkening the image. So first we're actually gonna do, so this is how I control my shutter speed in the back. For you guys, I believe you guys need to, let's see if I were to go to manual. If I go to manual, you guys have to press this up button. So you select it and then you move it with your scroll wheel, like that. For a little bit more expensive cameras,
But it broke at the jack.
we have a dedicated one in the back. So,
Oh man, that's a good
Kent and G, you guys can come close so you can see the LCD screen.
Not the J is separate.
I'm going to set my shutter speed to 1 to 30th. Kenji, when I give you the signal, I want you to move your limbs around your body crazy. Just don't move out of the frame. Okay.
Have a good weekend.
You too.
Let's let Mr. Arroyo pass by.
Excuse me.
That's not really good.
All right, everyone can see it here.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
I'm impressed.
On my cue, Kenji.
Okay.
We'll let that light close. 3, 2, 1, go.
Was I slow?
So we do have a little bit of motion blur here. Now let's go to the extreme. Let's do 1. We're gonna do 1. I'm gonna bring down my ISO. I can tell that I'm gonna be too overexposed, so I'm gonna bring down my aperture. Okay, let's try this again. Kennedy, on my command, you can start moving.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go. Look at this. It's like a ghosting effect. Okay. This ghosting effect, I'll let you take a look, Kenji. That's what happens. So when the shutter speed closes down, it closes down on that specific moment in time. At least that's if it's 1,000. But with one that says like 1, you're gonna hold it for 1 second, which means it's not gonna. You're good.
I smell something sweet, like cupcakes.
Yeah, I saw it too. But with 1 second, it's going to hold it for 1 second. Anything that's getting trapped is going to get captured in that frame. So that's why we get this ghosting effect. Does everyone understand that?
Speed.
Okay. How to apply shutter speed in the following scenarios. Fast shutter speed. That is ideal for sports, wildlife, and action photography. The quick shutter freezes the action of your subject, preserving a moment in time. Slow shutter speed, like we just saw, is used for light trails, waterfalls, and artistic motion blur. Some helpful equipment, tripods. Tripods during a slow shutter speed, or also called a long exposure, can help minimize the camera shake during the loss of exposure. So over here,
Yeah, I have one of those tripods.
tripods? Good. So over here, after reviewing the photos above, how can manipulating the shutter speed add to the subtle messaging of your story? So right now, this one's probably 1 like 10,000. Actually, that's too much. 1 1,500. How does that freezing it in the moment in time add to the story?
It makes it look like that the hummingbird is eating honey from the flower.
Okay.
Actually, maybe
The higher the shutter speed, the more frozen in time you're gonna look. So, yeah, I guess the higher you go up, it just helps to capture motion in a clean way. What about this one? I think this one's a better example. They could have done this, and everyone could be still. Why did they decide to have a little bit of motion blur in there?
to make it look like they're running.
Exactly. Instead of, we can feel their determination on their face here, but it's different to actually see a little bit of motion blur. What about this one here? What do these light rays do?
It almost looks like that the Flash or Sonic are racing fast.
That's exactly what I thought as well. These ones can give light rays, can give a more futuristic effect. It can really help encapsulate your vision. We have this one here. It's actually a combination between the two. It's kind of something similar to what we did with Kit and G here. The motion blur here obviously shows, yes, she's a dancer, but the more motion blur you add to it, it's almost as if she's like something from another world, you know, adds a little bit of mystery to it. Does the shutter speed aspect make sense to you? Because I know for me it was hard to understand at first. Even in theory, but actually applying it is a whole nother thing. So, we don't have time for the mini activity. That mini activity is one I was showing you. Let's talk about ISO. I want to get through the lesson first. And considering how many people are not here, I may repeat this lesson for them as well. Would you guys like that? So that gives you an extra week to apply all this that you've learned, and then you could come back the next week. Let's say if you can't remember everything. That good? Okay. So I know this is a complicated chapter. So ISO.
This is the first class.
This isn't the first class. We started about 3-4 weeks ago. But sometimes, like the second week, there wasn't a lot of people, so I decided to redo that lesson for the people who show up next week because it's such a fundamental skill, just like this. Everything we've been working on has been building up to this, which is why I'm going to repeat it. So, what is ISO? ISO measures the sensor's sensitivity to light. Low ISO, so between 100 to 400, produces high-quality images with less noise. That's best for bright environments. High ISO, 800 to 6400, brightens dark scenes but introduces grain/noise. A camera's ISO sensitivity can also be affected by the number of pixels on a sensor plane. The more pixels, the more sensitive to the light, in particular to highlight and shadows. This is semi-true when I wrote this, and then I watched the video to make sure it would line up. They point out that it's also measured, the number of pixels is measured by megapixels. The more megapixels, this is like a 12 megapixel camera. Just because there's few megapixels doesn't mean that it's necessarily better or worse at low light or capturing light. That just means that there's more space on the sensor for each of those pixels compared to something that's like 42 megapixels. Does that make sense? So we're gonna watch this video here.
While shutter speed and aperture control the amount of light physically hitting the sensor, ISO controls the amount of light the camera needs and is a representation of the sensitivity of the image sensor. As the ISO increases, the light it takes to expose the image decreases. For example, doubling the ISO from say 400 to 800 results in the camera needing only half as much light for the same exposure. This is the main reason such high ISO values are used in indoors, especially at sporting events and for photographing wildlife. Needing a fast shutter speed to freeze action and often with limited light available, photographers pump up the ISO as far as they're comfortable doing. However, increasing your ISO doesn't come without drawbacks. Let's compare a camera to a microphone. Microphones gather sound waves from a source, just like cameras gather light rays from the environment, and each turn them into electrical signals, which are outputted as either a sound file for a microphone or an image for a camera. Now, what happens if you're trying to record something very faint, like a whisper? You increase the sensitivity of the microphone. However, besides the whisper being louder, background noise is amplified as well, and you may even hear the hum of the microphone's electronics. Similarly, increasing the ISO of a camera increases its sensitivity to everything, revealing any lighting artifacts, as well as any electrical grain in the system. This phenomenon is referred to as noise in the world of photography. Higher ISO values don't just produce more noise, they also reduce the color accuracy and dynamic range. So you should use the lowest ISO value possible at all times. The lowest ISO value of your camera is considered the base ISO, a term that you may come across in the future. This ISO produces the best image quality and lowest amount of noise, but as stated earlier, low ISO values require lots of ambient light to properly expose the scene. It's also worth mentioning that not all cameras will have the same ISO profile. The ISO performance of your camera largely depends on the size of the photosites in your camera. What is a photosite? When you press the shutter button of your camera, the curtain in front of the image sensor slides up, exposing the photosites to ambient light. The photosites gather photons that enter through the lens, and once the exposure is over, the curtain slides over the sensor and the camera assesses the amount of photons that were gathered, converting the number into an image. Larger sensor cameras allow for larger photosites, which can gather more photons, so full-frame cameras have an advantage over crop sensor cameras. Also, lower megapixel counts mean that each photosite is allowed to take up more space on the sensor, increasing photosite size. However, older, lower megapixel sensors are not better for low light shooting, as advances in microlens design and the silicon itself have made modern sensors more efficient. So when should we use low and high ISOs? Remember that in every case, you should try to decrease your ISO as much as possible to retain image quality. But sometimes you may be forced to use higher ISOs. Low ISOs are particularly useful in outdoor photography, where the sun will provide lots of light for your camera, allowing you to more freely use faster shutter speeds and smaller apertures. ISO for indoor photography is largely situational. Depending on how well lit the area is, you may want to use higher ISO values. Remember that if your subject is not moving, you can use a slower shutter speed.
Okay, for some reason the stopping settings aren't working, so I think we watched a little bit too much. But does everyone understand? So I guess the question for the video, tell me when ISO should be changed, and what are some potential side effects as a result? Kenji?
Well, the side effects may it may make a little bit of noise, like it's an old television show.
Okay, that's a good analogy. Anything else? Isabella?
I would say it depends like on the quality of the image.
It does degrade the image, so because the higher it is, what's a rule to follow from the video? You remember? Generally, a good rule of thumb is when you have enough light, keep your ISO to the lowest it can be. Kenji, are you good?
I'm just using my shoe.
Okay. So a good rule to follow is when you have enough light, keep your ISO low. Another good rule, personally that I follow, is actually I'll save that for the last slide. Okie dokie. How and when to use ISO in the following scenarios. So daylight, we just talked about, use low ISO. For a more detailed image. For low light, we're going to increase the ISO about 800 to 3200. This is true, at the same time it's not. So there's something called dynamic range. Every camera has the ability to go up to see, the shadows and the highlights. However, when the camera processes that, the quality of it is actually determined by the camera itself, in particular the sensor. So, and that's not necessarily the sensor, it's more actually the algorithm the company uses. So like Sony, can't believe I'm gonna admit this, Sony uses, their low light sensors are known for being in low light conditions. A lot of people like to use it for star photography, stuff like that, because their algorithm interprets the data better than most. So when it comes to these values, for Sony this may be true, but for Canon it may not be the same. So if we look at the chart here, we probably want to avoid probably after 500 or above. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So don't forget to balance. After lowering or raising your ISO, use aperture and shutter speed to compensate for light sensitivity change. So after interpreting the image, where in the ISO range should we consider the no-go zone for increasing or decreasing ISO sensitivity? So let's take a look at the chart here. Definitely. Okay, so we can cross that one out. What else? 2500. I'm just going to go down the list. What about over here? just because it's at the low end doesn't necessarily mean that we can use it. I can use an ISO of 80, but if I'm in a dark room, that's not going to help me, right? I still have to see stuff. So in a dark room, maybe you might want to have an ISO of 300 to 400 and you bring in some additional light. If you have no light, you can go up to here. I know I called it the no-go zone, but if everyone remembers, rules are meant to be broken in photography. You can use your editing system, which we'll talk about in the second half of this course, to reduce the amount of grain. This is what the grain is called in your photo. So, does everyone understand this? I know this is a lot of information. It's the most technical out of all of it. Any questions? All right. We're actually going to do this activity. So everyone turn on your camera. And what I want you to do is change your mode to the letter M.
Already did that.
Your lens cap is still on. Has everyone ever changed it to M? So this is manual mode, and we'll talk about it in a second. Now your ISO is controlled by your dial wheel on the back here. My camera's a little different. It has a bigger wheel. For your guys, you see you've already tapped the ISO button.
Yeah, this is working.
Right there. You can press it, and now what I want you to do, point at an object, and I want you to move within the range of your ISO. First, I want you to do a full range from the base ISO all the way to the max ISO. Once you've done that, I want you to tell me, or not tell me, show me by taking the photo at the best possible ISO value. What I mean by that is go through the range and then remember which part looked the best and then take a photo of that.
Let me take it again. It's a little bit dim.
Okay.
This is
Stem 2. Okay, that's fine.
this is an angle.
Okay. So reason why. Let's look at Kenji's camera here. Your guys' camera has something similar. You see this number range here? That is over and under exposure. You use this on your camera to determine how under or overexposed you are. So right now it's telling me, like if I were to take a look at the image here, it's telling me I am three stops underexposed or more. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm actually going to change my shutter speed oops, that's gonna be a wonky image. Okay. You may need to fix your. What I would recommend is that you switch over to your ISO, and then manipulate the ISO value there using that number line. Does that make sense? Okay, better. Let's take another one.
1600 by
Oh my
1600.
god, that's way too bright.
Yeah. I would change your.
So right now it's 1600.
Okay.
Should I go lower or?
So let's just pick it first. Now we're gonna look at here. We're gonna pick it.
Way too bright.
Bring it up there. Now press it once. So we can go back to our menu. To the base thing. So we're gonna take a look at here. And depending on where this shifts, you might need to increase the ISO. How are we doing over here? Good. What was it? Okay, good job. Now I want you to take the photo, and I'm gonna watch and see how you expose.
Well, I think 200 looks better. I feel like here's too high.
Okay.
A little thing, you know.
So what you can do is you can get rid like that, and then you can reframe your image.
Yeah, okay.
Do it one more time so I can do it as distracting. Okay, that's good. That's a good photo right there, Isabel.
Thank you. Say 800 works the best for mine.
I see how you've, what do you call it? You adapted the ISO, but you also change your framing so it's more as level. So you're used to doing it high up.
I see two.
That's better. Now try to do it at its eye level, the Red Bull can's eye level. Because right now you're still looking down.
This is a high ISO. It's like 230.
Okay. You may want to switch over. You may want to, so just press OK. Press the center button here. So, we're at 125. You may want to
200
press this here. So now we're at aperture. And now what I want you to do is kind of fiddle with the aperture. Let me see. Are you doing Benji?
Very good. I'd say like 200 to 800 is
Okay. Okay, so look at your shutter speed's 1/5. So that's fine. But what that means is that the moment that you take it away, it's still going to be exposing for it. The shutter speed is going to be open. Too much. Do 125. Okay, so you may need to increase the ISO. That's better. Good job. All right, does everyone have a handle over this? At least a handle. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. I'm gonna briefly talk about manual mode. We won't do that activity because you've kind of already done the activity. So, putting it all together, using manual mode to the maximum. The exposure triangle is a visual way to understand how the following attributes affect not just your image, but each other. It also educates you how to compensate using the other two attributes. So, how to balance the exposure triangle. If you want a blurry background, actually, let me play the video first, and then we'll talk about the exposure triangle visual.
This or this, you need to understand the exposure triangle. The
There it
exposure
is.
triangle is how the main elements of a camera, ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, affects the exposure of the photo. Watch our previous videos to learn more about the three elements. The rule is that you have to strike a balance between the three elements. If one of the three elements change, you should adjust at least one of the other elements in the opposite direction. For example, in a bright setting, we would usually lower the ISO to 200 and choose a faster shutter speed like 1/500th to reduce light reaching the sensor. To balance out exposure and brightness, we would use a smaller aperture of about f8. In this example, we decided to increase the ISO and shutter speed while decreasing aperture. Continue practicing this in many different settings, and you'll definitely get the perfect picture.
So, one thing I was just thinking now, thinking of my personal experience, when it comes to balancing your settings, think of your ISO. When you move your ISO, it's going to be a big jump. From 100 to 200, you're essentially doubling the sensitivity. You're adding an additional 100. So that's why we want to use it last, because it does such a drastic change. Our shutter speed, which is 1 / whatever seconds, is a little bit more finite, okay? Because we're doing that window of that second. Aperture is even more finite because you have the blades and you can control how close they get into. So a good rule of thumb is mess with your aperture first, set whatever depth of field you want, then set the shutter speed for whatever motion you want, then use your ISO to balance between the two. Does that make sense? And then if you're kind of getting either too overexposed or still too underexposed, I'm assuming since your aperture is probably wide open, you may want to readjust with your shutter speed. But you always want to be adjusting your ISO last. So. So, putting it all together, where'd it go? There we go. So, how to balance the exposure triangle. If you want a blurry background, so wide aperture, so that is right here. You may need a faster shutter speed, which is right here, for these two, to avoid overexposure. If you want to freeze the action, if you want to freeze the action, you might need to raise the ISO to a wider, or use a wider aperture. So you can either, so let's say we're gonna put it at, why is the ISO? Oh, here we go. Sorry, got confused for a second. Yeah, shutter speed. So we have motion here. So let's say we wanted a still one. Let's say we're taking a picture of sports. This is where we want this to be around 1/8000th. Now, we can compensate by either bringing up our aperture, because 1/8000th is going to make it darker, and then you bounce between the ISO here. So probably, let's say, at least 1000 ISO. Does that make sense there? Okay. So, always check the camera's light meter to ensure proper exposure. So, question, using the following scenarios that I will verbally provide you with, use the exposure triangle to calculate the correct theoretical exposure compensation method. That is a jumble of a word. That doesn't make sense. So, here's a scenario. I'm taking a portrait at the at my niece's quinceañera. Okay? It's a portrait, so that means I brought my studio lighting, everything. I want a blurry background. So, what do I set my aperture to?
Uh, 1.4.
Correct. Now, I've set it to 1.4. Now, my image is too bright. What should I do next?
Lessen the ISO.
Not yet. Well, it depends. If, let's say you're taking a photo beforehand, and let's say you raise your ISO, you may need to bring it back down. What you could do is bring down the shutter speed, so you compensate for that. Or you change your ISO, either one. But you probably want to go with this one first. Okay? So, you'll probably end up being more like here. So let's say it's a fast moving one, like a car. What would I set my shutter speed to? So let's say I've seen this cool car driving on the highway. It's going really fast. I want to keep it frozen in time. What would I set it to 1/4, or would I set it to closer to 1/8000? 1/8000. So now that I have that, now my image is really dark. What can I do?
Increase the
You can either increase the ISO or you can increase the depth of field. Okay? Do those scenarios make sense? Any questions? No? Finally, when to use manual mode versus semi-automatic modes. Manual mode is best for full control and for the advanced photographer. Aperture priority, you can choose the aperture and the camera adjusts the shutter speed. Shutter priority, you choose the shutter speed and the camera adjusts the aperture. So, in summary, mastering aperture, shutter speed, and ISO allows creative control. Balancing the exposure triangle is key to getting a well-lit image. Manual mode takes practice, but it opens up endless creative possibilities. So, the thing to take home, originally, we're going to move on to the next lesson, but this was a big, chunky lesson, even my head's hurting.